Get to start with everybody that I've questioned. He'll get to question everybody that's a prospective juror. So I'll start out with juror number 56. See, you work for a local construction company?
Yes.
Okay. And what's your role at that construction company?
Manage job site.
Well, what does that entail?
Make sure everyone's being safe, productive, making sure the other's happy.
Okay. Well, what type of projects would you work on?
Right now, we're working on a healthcare project.
Okay. Like bigger buildings?
Yes.
And it looks like, were you working at UC at the time this incident occurred in 2015?
I was there during the trial.
Okay. Tell me about that, juror number 56.
Pretty tense on the campus. I know we had to really make sure everything was locked up, all the key drop equipment, that we're monitoring the situation just in case anything could happen.
Did you talk to any law enforcement officers at the time at or around campus as the time this was going on to work with them to make sure that your equipment was secured?
No, I did not. It was more the owner that we communicated with.
And just to get straight to some of the more important questions, it looks like you had heard of the incident, obviously, what you just said, and that when you were asked if you saw the video, which you saw, that your answer was yes, Dubose should have complied with officer. Could you talk to me a little bit about that, number 56?
Yeah, I feel like if a police officer asks you to do something, you should do it.
Okay. And maybe if you could expand on that a little bit, if the person doesn't comply exactly with what the officer said, do you feel it goes back to that person, kind of Mr. Dubose in this case, creating a situation that he would be at fault for at that point?
I think he might put more stress on the situation, for sure.
Okay. And talk to me a little bit about that. When somebody doesn't comply, how that would affect the officer in a case.
I mean, I would feel that an officer.
Any questions?
Yes, Judge.
Okay, go ahead.
Good morning, juror number 57. I have reviewed your questionnaire, and I saw the answers that Mr. Teeger asked you about question number 60 was whether or not you thought this shooting was justified or not, and you indicated that you thought it was justified. The following question asked you whether your opinion would influence your ability to be fair and impartial, and I believe you indicated that it would not. Is that a fair statement on my part?
I think I would be a good juror because I want to see all the evidence and have people explain to me. The only thing I've actually seen is news clippings off of media.
Okay, and you understand that this process is about selecting people who will listen to all the evidence and wait until they've seen all the evidence and heard all the arguments and heard the law that Judge Giz will explain at the end of the trial before you make your final decision. Okay, and there was another question in here about whether you had seen or followed the first trial at all, and you indicated that you had, correct? Okay. And I believe you indicated that you had formed an opinion.
I think, like I just stated, I believe if the man would have obeyed the police officer, he would have been.
But you said you could set any opinions you formed about guilt or innocence aside and decide the case after you've heard the evidence, correct? And you will be fair and impartial if we ask you to sit on this panel. Thank you. Judge, I would object to Mr. Teeger's motion to excuse for cause.
Juror number 57, you are excused for cause. Thank you for your service. Okay, when you're ready, Mr. Teeger.
Good morning. See, you are in the, is it speech pathology business?
Yes,
And-
I just graduated from grad school.
What type of grad school would that have been?
Sorry, university.
Okay. And are you looking for something in your field right now?
No, I accepted a job with construction and in July.
Congratulations. So you're good with time on this? And it looks like everybody else, you've heard of this case, the situation? And you had seen the body-worn camera?
Yes.
When had you seen it, juror number 59?
When it was first released 2 years ago, I haven't seen it since. I thought it was happening so fast. So I wrote it half opinion. I only see the picture. A lot of the media articles were all pretty opinionated, so I wasn't really sure how that would help people.
Okay. Is what you're saying the media opinions were either on one side or the other, and you just
I wasn't sure which was true, which wasn't, all of that.
okay. And I think you had put on your form that you had no opinion as far as the guilt or innocence based on seeing the video.
Yeah, I really know all of that.
Do you still feel like that? When they had asked you, I think, about the backlash kind of about what could happen if there was a verdict, I think you had said that this case is so well known and important in Cincy, the backlash is a little scary from media protest groups. Could you elaborate on that a little bit for me?
I guess just, there's a lot of protesters who are going to be upset no matter what happens. And so I think I knew a little bit from the last trial that, some of the jurors were worried about people being upset. So I think just since it is a high-profile case, they're a little worried, but I would still serve.
Okay. And then when you were asked about the number of unarmed African Americans shot by police, you had said, I know it can be a problem. I think people must be compliant to the law, which would prevent altercations. Could you discuss that a little bit with me?
Yeah, obviously each case is different, but I think that being compliant might make a difference in some of the cases, maybe not all of them. I'm not sure. I think there is a percentage, especially with the past few years, that it might be an issue if they're really don't know why.
Because the couple jurors that we questioned before you today, I think had a pretty strong opinion about being compliant, and it never would have happened had he been compliant. They didn't feel that they could be fair based on that situation. Could you talk to me a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think that it is important to comply, but in this case, I'm not sure if it would have changed the outcome or not. So I don't feel strongly about for this case as the two before, but I do think it's important. It's the law, but I'm not sure if the outcome would be different in this case, and I don't know if that's not different factors that impacted the decision also.
Okay. And your uncle is Mark Volman,
Yes.
and he's a prosecutor in my office.
Right,
He's in the civil division, that they call it, not in the criminal division, and I'm sure you respect him a lot.
I do, yes. And I actually didn't really know he was a prosecuting attorney until just this week. I knew he was a lawyer, but I didn't know.
Okay, I know he comes from a big family.
Yes.
Any impact on you being able to be fair to the defendant with your uncle being a prosecutor?
No.
Okay. Thank you, juror number 59. Juror number 62. Good morning. Let's see, you're in is it the healthcare business?
Correct.
And what type of work do you do in the healthcare business?
We assist patients care, a lot of customer services, a lot of processing of medical claims, and things of that nature.
Okay. And you were also in the military?
Yes.
What branch were you in?
Army National Guard.
When did you, are you still in it, or?
I know ETA out of 1991.
Okay. And it looks like you have seen the body-worn camera as well, juror number 62?
Correct.
And what is your thought after having seen that?
Actually, side for every story, you know, the defense side, prosecutor side, and the truth comes along with the variation of the story. So we get all the facts, we make a better educated decision on just about or not.
Okay. Because it looks like you didn't have a lot of discussions with different people, friends or family, about the case or the situation at all? Okay. Because I think when they had asked that, did you discuss the first trial? You said you had not. You did listen to some local media reports. In that really that even though you discussed the case, they did not include any feelings about expressing feelings of guilt or innocence of Mr. Tenzing at all?
Not really. Some people thought he may be innocent, some thought he may be guilty.
Okay. And do you feel that you could be a fair juror and make up your own mind in connection with the other jurors and listen to them, talk to them, and they would listen and speak to you as well?
Absolutely.
Thank you, juror number 62. See, juror number 68. Good morning. See, you're in the medical field as well?
Yes, sir.
And what type of things do you do in that field?
I work on medical equipment in the OR.
Are you actually in the operating room when procedures are taking place?
No. I want nothing to do with that.
Okay. And what type of equipment would you be involved with?
Anesthesia machines, primarily. That's my main focus.
Okay. How long have you been in that field?
Since 2002.
And it looks like you have 20 years in the Navy.
Yes, sir.
And what years were you in the Navy?
From 1981 to 2001.
Any impact on your military service with how you feel about the incidents in this case at all?
I'm not sure what you mean.
Would it be fair to say that you're trained in the use of weapons at all?
Yes.
Okay. Do you normally, now that you're out of the Navy, do you have weapons or shoot weapons at all?
I have them. I haven't shot anything but a dog gun since I got out.
Okay. And as far as the body-worn camera, had you seen that at all, juror number 68?
No. And I don't know how I didn't see it. I saw most of it recently when I walked in the room and then I walked out, but I really haven't seen it.
When you say recently, do you mean since you've been here in May or prior to that?
I think it's been since just the 25th.
Okay.
But it was like 3 seconds.
Okay. Would it be fair to say that you would have kind of tried to stay away from it and ignored it
I've been trying to.
because of the judge's instructions?
Exactly.
How have you been about ignoring it? I know it's kind of all out there.
It's very hard. I mean, I think my wife has actually been better at keeping me away from TV.
Okay. And do you have an opinion as far as whether or not the shooting was justified at all, juror number 68?
I've heard more about that case yesterday and today than I did when it was going on. So everything, my opinions that are forming now are based on what I've heard and hear.
Okay.
I think justified is a terrible word for something that we would call self-defense for us.
Right. Unfortunately, that's actually the legal, that's what it's called. But it is equivalent or it kind of equates to that defense. The elements or parts of it are a little bit different, but it's the same general feeling as that defense. Do you feel that going in now that you could be straight down the middle and you could be fair to Mr. Graffenried and I and also fair to Mr. Matthews and Mr. Tenzing?
Yes, sir.
On Black Lives Matter, you had put that they are after attention.
I believe that because I'll give one point. Over near University Hospital, when a young girl was killed in a drive-by, there was no Black Lives Matter for that young person, that young black person. Why weren't they there for her, but they're there when they're getting the attention from the media?
Okay. Would that affect your ability to be a fair juror in this case if there are people outside or people that are speaking their mind about this particular case in and around the courthouse?
No, I don't think that will impact my opinion.
And on question 115, when they talked about the number of unarmed African Americans shot by police, you had thought there was a problem in this area?
I mean, according to what you see on the news, there's a problem. I mean, I don't know what the true facts are, what the statistics are, but that's what it appears like you see.
Okay. And then you had said all people should comply to a police officer's request, which I think is what one of the other jurors before you had said. Could you expand on that a little bit for me and tell me what your thoughts are?
I mean, I was in the military. I mean, there's rules and regulations to follow them. That's just kind of the way it should be.
Okay. In this particular case, I think what I've said yesterday was that in this case, Mr. Tensing had asked that Mr. Dubose take a seatbelt off, and also Mr. Tensing opened up Mr. Dubose's car, and Mr. Dubose closed the car and didn't take off his seatbelt. So if you want to look at it in the way that he wasn't exactly complying with what Mr. Tensing was saying at the time, what are your thoughts on that and how they'd impact maybe a decision that you'd make in this case?
Everything you just said kind of, it's all the beginning to a terrible event that happened, and it's kind of hard, not knowing all the facts and what happened after what you just stated, it's kind of hard to say what might or might not happen.
Okay. Would that basically be I know a couple of the jurors before you got excused because they had strong opinions about if he would have complied, it never would have happened, and they really couldn't be fair to the state in this case. A juror, a couple before you, kind of expressed some of the same opinions and said he should have complied, but she feels that she could be fair. Where do you fit in that continuum?
I think he should have complied. I can be fair. I can be impartial to the facts. I don't know, other than having a time machine and going back in time and telling him to comply, you don't know what would have happened if he had. It's kind of hard to speculate on.
Do you feel that somebody that didn't comply could still be a victim?
I guess so, yeah.
Okay. Maybe you could think about that a little bit as we're talking.
Somebody who doesn't comply to somebody
To an officer's request,
could be a victim.
could that person be a victim just moments later?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay. And I just want to make sure, and I'm using my words, but I'd like to hear your words, that just because a person doesn't do exactly what an officer says, they're not responsible for what's to follow if the response is criminal or inappropriate.
I'm not sure how to answer that.
Could you try your best?
So it sounds to me like you want me to say, because he didn't comply, it was his fault that he died.
And I'm sorry you feel that way. I'm totally not trying to get you to say anything. I just want to try to get out the truth about how you feel. Just your honest feelings, not one way or another. So just however you look at it.
I feel he should have complied, and everything that happened after that is tragic.
Okay. Do you feel that you could be fair to Mr. Dubose, even though he may not have complied with what Officer Tensing was doing at the time? Do you feel that he could still be a victim of the person that he didn't comply with?
Yes.
Okay. On the civil settlement, I think you had said the university acted too soon.
Yes, sir.
Tell me why you feel that way.
They gave all, I don't even know what you could say. I just know they settled, but he wasn't found guilty or innocent. I think that was just a big, It's like it's saying, oh, he was guilty, we're going to give you all this money, so go away. Instead of waiting for the process to work and then determine, whether he's innocent or guilty.
Okay. And I think I talked to maybe one or more of the jurors yesterday about that kind of issue where it's a whole different group of people. Mr. Graffenried and I weren't involved in that. Mr. Matthews wasn't involved in that. It's UC's people with Mr. Dubos's family's people, and that's a separate decision, maybe based on other circumstances. What are your thoughts on that?
The university kind of, they put their opinion out there in the public saying that he was guilty before it was ever tried by paying however much money they paid.
Okay.
Even though they're not the justice system, but they put that opinion out there to the world basically because they paid.
Okay. And how would that impact you if you feel that UC independently determined that Officer Tenzing was wrong in what he did? How would that impact you?
You mean on my opinion on everything?
Yes.
It doesn't really affect my opinion on what happened.
Okay. That other people may have researched or reviewed everything at UC, and they thought that was the way to go.
I'm going to agree with BS is saying, Mr. Stephen belongs to.
Thank you, Judge. It looks like when they had asked you about your brother was convicted of a crime. Could you talk to me a little bit about that?
My brother has a drug problem, and I don't have to associate with my brother. It's not since before I left the military, but recently he tried to rob a bank, and now he's in jail somewhere.
Okay. Was that here in Hamilton County?
Yes.
And he got caught? Do you know if he's in the Justice Center?
I don't believe so. I think he's somewhere in northern Ohio.
In the penitentiary?
Yeah.
Okay. Did you follow that at all as far as whether you thought that he was treated fairly?
No.
I mean,
I don't have anything to do with it.
okay. Thank you, juror number 68. Juror number 70? Is that okay? So you're in work for a local company in some type of analysis? And what type of things would you do on a day-to-day basis?
I sit with people and talk with them about how they do their job, and then work through the steps and see if there's some ways that we can do it.
Okay. With the body-worn camera, I think you had noted on your form that you have not seen it. And have you heard of the Tenzing Dubose case prior to coming for jury service? Have you formed any type of opinions on guilt or innocence at all? How have you followed it, juror number 70?
Just inquiries with people who are discussing it, what's going on.
And I know, and I apologize for all of you, and especially you folks who are having to listen to this again, but a lot of people have shared their opinions now about the body-worn camera, the case. Do you have anything that you would like to let us know that you think might impact on either Mr. Graffenried and my thoughts, or Mr. Matthews or Mr. Tenzing's thoughts about whether you'd be a fair juror?
I think I would be a fair juror.
And it looks like you were, it's hard for me to figure out that you were in court a few times, it looks like, and you were a character witness for a friend's kids and a misdemeanor with one of your own kids. Could we go through those?
The first time I was my neighbor had two young children. She got a DUI and she needed somebody to sit with her so her sister was
Okay. Okay. And then what about for your own kids?
He was a misdemeanor shot, good
Okay.
and we did probation.
Do you feel that he was treated fairly?
Yes, I do.
Because I know a store, somebody would have said that he stole something. Did he admit that he had stole something? Okay. And it looks like you've got a friend that's a Norwood officer. Would that impact on your being a juror in this case? And as far as the number of unarmed African Americans shot by police, you had thought that there is a problem in that area?
I think so. I don't know, when you think about the police, I would prefer to think that, 80% of them don't target people, or the majority do not. But I really don't know the statistics.
Okay. And as far as whether you thought the criminal justice system was fair, you had put that it was not fair, that poor people don't get a good defense sometimes and can't access help as easily. Tell me about your thoughts on that.
I think public defenders are probably overworked and probably
Okay. Do you have any doubts that Mr. Matthews is extremely well prepared and is one of the top attorneys in the city that spent a lot of time on this case and knows the facts inside and out? Sure.
I don't know anything about Mr. Matthews.
Okay. But you don't think Mr. Tensing fits into that classification where somebody's kind of in over their head, or maybe has too many cases and can't devote the attention to a particular case maybe that they should?
I don't think so. I don't think Mr. Matthews is a public defender.
Okay.
Is that true?
That is.
He is not.
And again, not to get too much into the way the system works, but he has private cases, but like a lot of attorneys that handle private cases also are on a list that they do handle some public defender cases as a favor to the court, but he is a private lawyer. Okay. Thank you, juror number 70. See number 72. Good morning. It looks like you've worked in the medical field, but are you currently unemployed?
I'm
Retired.
retired.
Okay. How are you enjoying your retirement?
I absolutely love it.
Good. Well, what type of things are you doing?
I work as a cardiovascular technologist, so I work with heart patients. I did IV therapy. I was an EMT, so I transported patients. I worked with an mobile intensive care unit, so we transported patients back and forth. I've done just other things.
Okay. And what are you doing with in your retirement?
I play music.
Okay.
And I have a duo, so we travel and play music together.
Okay.
And pray.
And that you would play an instrument then?
I do what I can.
Okay. And what's your husband play?
He plays guitar and drums.
Okay. And what type of music do you play?
James Taylor, pop singer, 70s,
Okay.
70s, 80s.
Okay. And I was a little confused by your questionnaire, and maybe I'm sure you can straighten me out on it. And again, I apologize for bringing this up in front of all these people, but you've been the victim of domestic violence is it a couple times?
Yes.
And could you talk to me about that a little bit?
And was not very good at picking spouses. And unfortunately, two of them turned out to be very abusive. And I was put in the hospital a couple of times due to the domestic violence. And promptly divorced them.
Okay.
After everything was over with.
Were you was there like a weapon used, or was it mainly like hands or feet, things like that?
One was hands, one had a gun involved.
Okay. And each of one of the two of your prior husbands, one had a weapon and one just beat you? The one that, were either of them officers or, okay, the officers in your area investigated it?
Yes.
Okay. What were the outcomes of the cases?
The one without the weapon was just restraining order, ordered to stay away.
Were criminal charges filed in that case?
I don't think so.
Okay. Was that your decision? Okay.
Like I said, not really judgment.
Okay. And what about the one with the weapon?
That one, he did go to prison. He was found guilty.
What year would that have happened in juror number 72?
In this,
Has it been a number of years?
yeah, back in the 70s.
Okay. Probably none of the people that were here in this courtroom were involved in the case? Okay. Do you feel that you were treated fairly by the police and the prosecutor's office? And as far as the body-worn camera, have you seen that or not, number 72?
I saw snippets of it. I never saw it from start to finish. I would catch little pieces of it as I would pass by the TV, but I didn't follow the case.
And what are your thoughts on whether you think you could be a fair juror in this case? Anything you'd like to discuss about, based on what some of the other jurors have said? When you were asked about the shooting of unarmed African Americans, you had said, part of what you said is that if you follow an officer's orders and comply, you are less likely to risk being shot despite what color you are. Could you talk to me a little bit about that?
Well, it comes to the complying again. I think you're less likely to get into trouble if you follow an officer's orders. The fact that, in this case, that the orders weren't followed, I don't think it necessarily would evolve into the way it ended this time, routinely in a case.
And I know that's kind of been a topic we've talked about a little bit today with a few of the other jurors. Do you feel that, despite the fact that some may say that he didn't comply, that you could be fair to Mr. DuBose's issue in this case? And I think you also had some concerns about being singled, if you were a juror, being singled out by the public, especially groups that seem to want violence no matter what verdict is reached.
Yes. I know some of the groups, the protest groups, and everybody has a right to protest, that's fine. Peaceful protest is great. But some of the groups don't seem to be so peaceful at times. So I would be a little worried about someone finding out, that I was a juror and getting in my face.
Okay,
To be brutally honest.
sure. And if that were to happen, do you feel that you could handle yourself after it's over?
Oh, yes.
Okay,
I would like.
okay. And you grew up in a predominantly African American neighborhood? What part of town did you grow up in?
Avondale.
Okay.
I lived in Avondale until the second grade, and then I moved to North Fairmount and lived in North Fairmount most of my life.
Okay. Thank you, juror number 72. See juror number 73. Good morning. And thank you, sir, I appreciate it. See, it looks like, I think we talked about this. Do you have some work commitments if the trial lasts a little bit long?
Yeah, I do have like teaching commitments, but there are other people. It would be not amazing for if I were to find someone else, but
Okay.
it can be done.
Well, when would that start?
It's supposed to start
Oh, this coming Monday?
The particular camp that is a little bit of a problem, the office hours.
Say that again.
Like the time where I'm just in my office is no big deal. We just happen to have like a day camp going on next week. So
Okay.
finding a replacement teacher for that day camp is of concern.
What hours are the day camp?
It's morning. It's like 9 to 12.
So the 9:30 to 1:30 would exactly be the same time as your camp.
Exactly, yeah.
And if, I guess only you could tell us whether you think you could be a juror and have somebody cover that, or whether you feel that you can't be a juror because you need to do it.
Yeah. We could find someone to cover if I was the right person to be on the jury.
Okay, that's a fair answer. And it looks like you feel that minorities are targeted by police.
I do feel that way, yes.
Could you talk to me a little bit about that?
Sure. I feel that, unfortunately, our cultural institutions are not always as equitable as they should be, and that often white people or white ways of doing things become the norm, and things that are different are then thought of as incorrect or not the right way to be. When really it's more just that, things are a little more, the path I walk is the way a person will easier, I think, than that of a person of color. And that I am familiar with some data around these things, so it's easy to see that, for instance, like drug crime, we convict people of color at a higher rate, even though the rate of usage is very similar across all races. So why does that happen? So that's kind of what leads me to that feeling.
Okay. And on the body-worn camera, you had said that you had seen that?
I have seen it. It was when it happened in 2015. I've not seen it since.
And when they had asked you, what did you think after seeing the video, you had said no one should be shot for a small infraction / traffic stop. Could you expand on that for me a little bit?
Sure. I don't think that being pulled over for something like a taillight or registration or something like that should end in you losing your life. I don't feel like that's the way our society should work.
And, I know a lot of people, we've talked about Black Lives Matter. A lot of people have a lot of opinions on that. You're actually a member of Black Lives Matter?
I am a member of Black Lives Matter.
Okay, how long have you been a member?
Since September, October 2016.
And what got you to join, or what was the impetus for you to join that organization?
I felt in the run-up to the election, there were a lot of instances, public instances of hate speech, of racist incidents, what happened with Dylan Roof at the AMU church, things like that showed me that, people need to stand up and say things aren't right.
Okay.
And I wanted to do that.
Did you ever, juror number 73, get involved in any kind of protests or organizations with regard to the DuBose Tensing case?
Not especially. I have been to some rallies that were sort of just specifically about police brutality, not specific to this incident.
Okay. You had said in your form that you can set aside all your prior knowledge or your organizations and be fair to both sides?
I think I can. I'm definitely the kind of person who, when presented with evidence that is, contrary to an opinion I might hold, I'm open to changing that opinion. I'm not someone who would stick to something even when the facts don't bear it out. I try to base my opinions on real things, so if presented with a number of facts, I'll make an opinion about that set of facts.
So sitting here today and knowing that we're at this table and Mr. Tensing and Mr. Matthews are at that table, do you honestly feel that you could be fair to Mr. Tensing just as equally as you could be fair to the state?
I do feel I can be fair in that this is sort of a specific thing, in that we're looking at this body of evidence, and he's a real person, he's sitting right there. It's not just some kind of knee-jerk media opinion kind of thing.
Okay. Could you, if you go through this case and you were to say that, regardless, would you feel that you'd have to justify whatever your decision is to the people at Black Lives Matter at all? What I'm saying is,
I don't know that I would. I don't know. I would prefer not to bring it up in that circle, honestly, only because of the attention that it would bring to
Sure.
me personally, and that's like not the point of why I'm in it. So I would certainly be something that I would consider that if it was going to be something that attracted a lot of attention to me, I probably would not go back necessarily to sort of like the general body meeting stuff. I might stick with my own volunteering programs I do through them, but not go to some of the bigger stuff anymore.
Okay.
If it were something that turned out to be, like if it was open and people knew about it.
okay. Thank you, juror number 73. I'm just trying to count here. So we're through 21, so I think the thought is to get through 28. So we're getting there. Seat juror number 74. It looks like you have some concerns because you are you the primary caregiver for your 86-year-old mother?
Yes, I'm scheduled with my mother. She had lung cancer.
I'm sorry about that.
Still functional lung disease. She's not in bed right now. She's got all the faculty, but I do tell her. I do cook her dinner and breakfast.
And if you could keep your voice up for the court reporter.
Yeah, and I do the cleaning. She has an old dog that she has to have.
Okay.
That's more like conceited, really.
Did you stay with her, or do you live separate and apart? You stay with her?
Yes.
Is anybody there to watch her while you're in this?
I'm here now. My sister is in from Florida, but she just had a brand new grandbaby born in D.C., and she's going to be leaving to go up there next week.
Okay.
15th, I think.
And this process should be the 15th of June?
Yeah.
So in like 10 days or so, 9-10 days. So if again, I'm not sure how long this will take, but hopefully we'd be at towards the tail end of this trial, in that it's a 9:30 to 1:30 schedule. Would you be good with that?
I can't say for sure that I would be, because if something happens to her, I'm going to have to be there.
Yes, sir. I think we're going to have it.
She's already fallen on. My sister can't sometimes get there until 10 o'clock, and I have to leave the house about 7 to get here.
Okay.
And that's going to leave her 3 hours by herself.
I guess the thought is we'd have, we call it alternates, so that we're going to pick, I think, 4 alternates that are going to be able to fill in for jurors if there are emergencies. So there would be a support system or a safety net if you had to get called away. Would that make you feel better about maybe being a juror, that it wouldn't be just the iron, 12 that had to be here the whole time?
I don't think so, because I'm concerned about, she's there for 3 hours by herself.
Okay.
And I don't want to be out of the house for 3 hours.
Okay.
Her
Sure.
fault. I've already had to pick her up off the deck.
Well, would it be fair to say that you just don't think you could be here because your attention would be on your mom and what could be happening at the time? And with the sequestration,
My father died when I was 6 years old. She's been there with 8 kids. I know I only put 4 on every because I forgot to turn the page.
sure.
But she raised 8 kids by herself.
Okay.
My baby sister was born. She had 4 diapers. She had to change the diapers and wash them up.
It sounds like this probably isn't a good time for you to be on any kind of trial. Judge, I would ask that he be excused for cause.
Juror number 74, you are excused for cause. Thank you for your service.
Sure, Judge. See juror number 77. In your doctor, that's still the same. Okay. And you're a scientist, and you work with, is it polar bears? Okay. How long have you, is it just that, and I don't want to sound too stupid, like I'll call it an animal instead of a species, I don't even know, but is it just that one particular?
Yeah, my focus is on polar bears. I do work on some other species as needed, so red pandas and other bear species.
Okay. And you looks like you have heard of the case,
I have, yes.
and you've seen the camera.
I did. I saw the footage when it was initially released.
And when they had asked you what your opinion was on whether it was justified, you said not sure if it was justified or not.
Yeah, and I guess like when I heard that there was body camera images available, I thought that, you know, the truth would be very evident, visible upon watching it. But when I watched it, I did not feel like I could come to a conclusion whether or not it was justified or not.
Okay.
It was quick and I wasn't scared and I didn't feel like I could see much.
How many times would you say that you've seen the video?
I watched it one time all the way through, and then I know it's been all over the news, so I think I've seen clippings here and there, but I didn't really stop to watch it again.
Okay. And as far as, I think you'd be maybe a good person to talk to about this, about expert witnesses. Tell me your thoughts generally about expert witnesses.
Well, hopefully they would be people with the most knowledge of a particular area of interest, so either video camera footage or whatever. But I know that there are different opinions, so based on opinion, the two scientists in the same room, they can certainly disagree about the same subject or how it should be interpreted. And definitely coming from the prosecution side and defense side, they're going to have conflicting opinions for sure. So it was a good idea to synthesize what they were telling me and come to my conclusion.
Is that common in your field to have different experts disagree about maybe what the right approach or what certain data means?
Well, we have a peer review process in science, so usually you're judged on, anonymously by 3 or 4 peers. They review your work and present you with suggestions, comments. I guess sometimes people definitely disagree on how data should be interpreted.
Have you published in your field?
Yes.
What type of, maybe if you could just give me something I could maybe understand, like what type of articles have you published in?
So I published in animal science journals primarily, so I'm a reproductive physiologist. My main focus is a better understanding of the reproductive processes of endangered species. So one of my more recent articles was I'm trying to develop a pregnancy test for polar bears. So I'm looking at novel biomarkers that we can non-invasively develop a test for pregnancy in a species that doesn't yet exist.
Okay.
So I do my studies and I write them up and submit to a journal, and reviewers will comment on them and decide whether or not it should be published in that journal, and I'll give you revisions and resubmit.
Okay. Do you feel, and I know I talked about this yesterday, if you've got a couple experts on one side and a couple on the other, do you feel that you could distinguish them instead of, let's say, they have 2, we have 2, they just cancel each other out, I don't really know which one to buy?
I think whichever side makes a more compelling argument could potentially win out over the other side.
Okay. Okay. And it looks like there was an incident, it looks like up in Philadelphia where you had stayed at a time, where a Philadelphia mounted patrol police officer was found guilty of molesting a child at a stable you had ridden at throughout high school. Tell me about that a little bit.
So I'm from Philadelphia originally, and I was involved in horseback riding during late elementary and high school. And I'm in Philadelphia mounted patrol stable. It's not too far from my stable. And there was an officer that would come by frequently on his horse and sort of hung out with us. And it was mostly like young
Do you know whether he admitted or denied or what the, and I guess it took her a while to disclose?
Yes, I knew that it went on, I don't know, but I heard that it went on for over a year.
Okay. Do you feel that based on what you know the justice system worked in that case?
I think so.
Okay. Thank you, juror number 77. See, juror number,
Can we hold one moment?
Yes, okay. Do you need me?
No, this student said.
I think juror number 77, you will get a word from most interesting. I want to hear lots more about it. Very interesting.
Okay, so can
Let's take a quick stretch. You can stand up real quick.
Okay.
I probably should.
I'm just looking out for you.
thanks a lot. That's funny.
Okay. Seth, whenever you're ready. Mr. Teeger, we can go back on the record.
Thanks. What Mr. Griffin brought to my attention was I think you had put on your questionnaire that you had finished some answers on the back of maybe of a page, and
Yeah.
we didn't. It just got copied for everybody, so we're good on that now.
All right.
And you work for looks like a local store,
Yeah.
and it's you work in website type stuff. What do you do?
So help manage the website, mostly back-end deployments, so we need sort of, not a lot of the stuff you see, a lot of pipeline background.
The background stuff.
Yeah.
How long have you done computer work?
4 or 5 years.
And it looks like you've you know about the case, the Tensing Dubose case.
Yeah, I started to pay attention near the end of the last one, when it was like, right around the time the jury was deliberating, because everybody kept talking about their riots and whatnot, so I was really curious as to what was going on.
Okay. And tell me how you felt about when people were talking about if there was going to be riots or not.
I'm all about peaceful protesting. I don't like all the rioting, because people end up, they don't like the verdict, but no matter what way it goes, they get angry and they end up destroying the city because they're angry. There are even instances where hockey people, after hockey games, destroy the cities, which I never understood.
Okay. Do you feel that would impact on your ability to be a fair juror in this case?
No. No, I don't think that is anything necessarily good for this. It's how other people take the decision.
Okay. And on the question that we've been talking about a lot, you said, I see both sides. He shouldn't have driven off, but I'm not sure a gun should have been out. I don't know.
Yeah, so, I mean, from what a lot of people have said, at the time, it was a simple traffic stop. I don't see why, at least from the details that I have seen very quickly from online media, Twitter, and stuff like that, why a gun was necessary. I understand that he's running in, he opened the door, closed it, but I don't see that as necessarily the reason to automatically pull out a weapon. And so, should it have gone, I don't necessarily know the details.
Do you have an opinion based on what you've heard and seeing the video and talking to your friends and family about what verdict would be appropriate in this case before you hear the evidence?
Not really, because I have friends that are on both sides. I've seen the video, again, it was a couple of years ago, but I've seen the video. It's hard to see actually what was going on and what happened. So I don't really know.
Okay. And I'm glad you're sitting a couple people away from the juror that we talked to earlier, but about Black Lives Matter, you said it's a group spreading racial hate under the guise of doing good. Tell me about your thoughts on that.
I think it has good intentions. I think we all need somebody to fight for us, no matter our race, no think it means well, but I don't think it executes correctly.
Okay. And if you and the jury that's a member of Black Lives Matter are both chosen to be on the jury, do you think you could work with that jury?
Yeah, because I don't think it's basically.
Okay. You'd base it just on the facts of this case? As far as your name being released, tell me your thoughts on that, juror number 78.
I would not want my name released. If it was released, that's okay as long as the address is not released. Although being on the internet and how easy it is to find someone's address, so I would not want to.
And I think that's kind of still going on, but if there's any indication from the last trial, I think what I'd said before was that at the conclusion of the trial, the questionnaires were released, but they were heavily redacted, so that there was no personal information, not only just name, but anything that could lead to somebody identifying you and tracing you back to a certain person. Would that be okay if it were the same type of situation in this case?
My worry is not for myself, it's for my family.
Okay.
My girlfriend, who I live with.
Okay.
I worry about them either getting harassed by media, because they do that, or being harassed by people who are just going over the top, who may mean well, but are going over the top. And that's more of my fear, not so much worry.
Okay. And on the number of unarmed African Americans shot by police, you had said, I think like a lot of people had talked about today, the problems arise from people not complying with police officers. Things get escalated because people run or fight instead of just talking.
Yes, so I think cops have hard jobs. I think they're in high tension situations at all points. And so any way that we can make their lives easier when we interact with them, I think that's where it should go. You never know what they've had to deal with on the particular shift they're on. And so anytime I run into a police officer, they're pulling me over or whatever, I try to be as nice as possible and try to, because they don't know who I am. Just because I'm a white male does not mean that I am mean and harm.
Okay.
So I try to let them know from the beginning I don't, so that everything goes smooth and get away unharmed.
And then, from what I've said to some of the other jurors and their responses, tell me your thoughts about your own feelings about how that would impact your decision in this case.
I know, so from what we hear, it sounds like he wasn't fully compliant, but I also think that the punishment should have been crime. So in this case, he necessarily didn't except close the door, which there could have been tons of other reasons for that. He could have been trying to grab the door to give him support to get out of the door, and but there's tons of other things that could have been going on. And so for him to, at the end of the day, end up being killed is not necessarily good. I don't agree with that. But like I said, I can see both sides, I see both arguments.
Okay.
I'll need more information.
Thank you, juror number 78. And let me just read the back page here real fast. Are you 79? 81. Is 79 out?
Yes.
Out. Okay. Sorry, Judge. See number 84. 81, I'm sorry. I have it mixed up. 81. Let's see, you are an analyst in a local store?
Correct.
Okay. And I think you had said your workload was stressful and cumbersome?
At times, yes.
Okay. And how would that affect your ability to be fair in this case?
It wouldn't affect my ability to be fair. It just means all the hours I spent here, I can make up the back end of the day or the week.
Okay. So, for instance, today we're here from, I'm sure you're here early, and then we're going to be here probably till 3:30ish again. How would that impact your day today?
It just means that everything I have to get done today, I will do it tonight.
Do you feel that, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say this.
Do you have a lot of energy?
I do.
Okay. And you feel that you could kind of do both things, be here, and I guess what we'd be asking the jurors to do is, while they're here, concentrate 100% on the proceedings here, what the witnesses say, what everybody's talking about. Can you do that? Because that's, I guess, what the concern is, that you'd be maybe thinking about, I have to do this, I have to do that, you know, I wish I didn't have to get done with that. Do you feel that you could compartmentalize this job and that job? And it looks like, as far as the body-worn camera, you had seen that?
Saw it once, yes.
Okay. And your answer was, it would have been a tough situation for anyone. I don't think he needed to shoot, to kill, or shoot at all unless a gun was present. Could you talk to me a little bit about that?
I mean, just putting myself, I'm a very analytical person, and I like to put myself in those shoes. In the situation, it was late at night. It happened this good at night, so walking up to the situation, it could have been a little sketchy.
Let me just correct you for a sec. It was 6:30 in the evening, so it was a light day. It was in the summer, so it was right. Oh, that's okay. That's okay.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I don't really have judgment because I can see both sides of it. But police officers have a very stressful job. I understand that. And going into some situations, they might have, understand that, all right, this might be a little different situation going into it, and especially when the person is not comply and say, hey, please pick up your suit and get out of the car. And when things go sour after that, anyone in this room or anyone in the world will, have a little bit of nerves going through their mind there.
Sure.
So would a drawn gun be the right answer? I'm not sure. I didn't go through training, but I don't think that's the right way to do it. But I do see the ends of.
Do you think you could be a fair juror, juror number 81? When they had asked you whether you had formed an opinion as to the guilt or innocence of Mr. Tensing, you had put that you had formed an opinion?
Correct.
And what was that opinion?
Well, to be honest, like I said, I only saw the video once.
Sure.
It was a long time ago. The opinion was, I believe I said I wasn't sure the exact right was justified or not. I just believe the situation was difficult for the officer, and obviously when when things went sour, like getting out of the car, obviously that person in the car knew there was going to be repercussions if they didn't do it, so they were trying to hide something. So like I said in the questionnaire, I wasn't sure if it was justified or not due to those sides not really.
Okay. Did you have an opinion, though, as to the guilt or innocence of the defendant in this case?
I did, but like I said, I saw the video once. I'm very analytical, so I would like to see all the facts.
Sure. But at the time you saw it and knew what you knew when you answered this, what was your opinion?
I think we discussed it earlier. I think my opinion was, I don't know if it was guilty or not guilty. I just believe there are guns should not have been drawn. And
Got you.
should have been.
Okay. And on, when you were asked, much has been reported about Sam Dubose and his family, and you had said that they seem determined to get what they think Ray should get in terms of justice.
Correct. I mean, that's like any other parent.
Okay.
If they, if your child did not see justice as fair, they're going to do anything for their child. My parents would do it, anyone else's parents would do it here.
Okay. And as far as Black Lives Matter, it seems like that's kind of a lightning rod for a lot of opinions. Tell me your thoughts on that organization.
I think what I stated in there, and similar to Blue Lives Matter, all people matter. I mean, no matter your religion, your race, it all matters. But and I think what they're doing is the right cause. I just don't think how they're doing it, or the riots that partake because of it, and the frustration that they have of it, are the right way to go about it. I think.
Okay. And how do you feel about the media coverage, and as far as how that would affect or impact you at all as far as reaching a verdict in the aftermath?
My opinion on the media, I think they're the reason for the rage, to be honest. They try to think that are doing good news, and it might be skewed in one way so they know it's going to cause an uproar.
Okay. And it looks like early on that you wanted to be in the FBI? Okay. Tell me about that.
Just growing up, like you said earlier, I had a lot of energy. I'm very athletic. I like to be on the move. Watching the movies growing up, watching all the action movies. I just saw myself wanting to be that. I even had like a little coloring book when I was growing up saying I want to be an FBI agent.
Okay. What got you maybe away from that law enforcement path and into the path that you went to?
I started understanding that I like numbers a lot, and I kind of figured out that's a little bit safer, and I was very good at sports, so I kind of veered away from that.
What are your thoughts about expert witnesses?
They're going to be the last one in, no matter who's paying them. Granted, they're going to analyze it correctly, but they're also going to shade it in a way that their side gets the benefit of the doubt.
Do you feel that you could be fair to an expert witness, or do you think you have, for instance, do you think that some expert witnesses are honest and try to do the right thing regardless of who's paying them, and they don't really give the answer that the money person wants, that I don't care who pays me, this is my decision one way or another? Do you feel there are people like that?
Well, I've never been in that situation, but I feel like they would try to do the best to their ability. But like I said, no matter who's presenting, I would like to see that as myself and make my own judgment, no matter who's biased in one way or another. That's just how my brain works.
Sure. And what I'm saying, juror number 81, is that at least the expert witnesses that we have are very, very important to our case. And I just want to make sure that you're going to pay attention to them and not really say, they got paid by the state, they've got an agenda, these people got paid by the defense, they've got an agenda, I'm just going to...
That's not what I was trying to get across.
Okay.
I was just saying that you asked my opinion. That's
Sure.
what I did. But if I was going to pick me on the jury, I'd obviously do my duties the right way. That's just my opinion on expert witnesses.
Sure. But you don't feel that expert witnesses would cancel each other out because each are basically called by one side or another and they have inherent biases going into the case? Okay. Thank you, juror number 81. See, juror number 84. Good morning. See, you're looks like an intervention specialist. And what type of things would you do in your daily job?
Well, I am intervention specialist and special education teacher.
Okay.
And so I work with students that keep them in the regular classroom setting. I work with students that have IEPs.
Okay. And would you work with like school psychologists and things like that and try to figure out what's best for a particular individual?
Right.
And maybe their classroom teacher?
Well, I co-teach as well. So I work regular and special ed.
Okay. And it looks like you've been in court. Is it for custody of was it somebody else's child that you were going through and you were involved in?
That's good.
Will you put it on your form?
Yeah.
We did read these.
Yeah, I have a daughter, and in August of 08, he got married. By October of 08, just between my niece and my sister-in-law, just didn't work out. So she came to live with me, and so in 09, I think, summer 09, I got custody.
Okay. Do you feel that the court system worked the way it was supposed to?
It worked too fast, actually.
Okay. Okay. And as far as this particular case, do you know much about the Dubose-Tenson case?
I remember seeing it when it first happened, but I didn't follow it because I'm not really a new person following it and all that.
Okay. And it looks like you have seen the video, but you said it's been so long that I can't remember.
Right.
Would you say you have an opinion one way or another as to the guilt or innocence of the defendant in this case?
Do I have an opinion?
Straight down the middle, you could be fair to both sides? And it looks like when they asked about the number of shootings and so forth, you said there are problems, lack of understanding on both sides. Could you elaborate on that a little bit for me?
Oftentimes, people may know the law, maybe not want to follow the law, and then maybe oftentimes public servants, maybe they follow the law too straightforward, don't let people have a little benefit of the doubt.
Okay. And then when they had asked you whether the criminal justice system was fair, you had thought the high rate of incarcerated African Americans was a concern to you. Could you talk to me a little bit about that?
Well, because that's what I normally hear. Being African American, you hear that a lot. Oftentimes you see it on television. It's not really until you're around Caucasians that you hear about, like, in the workshop, you hear their family members are having issues too. So I really don't hear that side because I really don't have that conversation unless I'm in a work environment. So that's how I form that.
Okay. Thank you, juror number 84. At 25 now? Should I do 3 more then, Judge? When I said there's 3 more, don't think that it's over, because then Mr. Matthews gets to get up and talk to 1 through 28 again. So we are kind of getting there. So, number 85. So you work for a corporation?
Correct.
What type of work would you do for that corporation?
Facility maintenance company, and I manage the construction division for that.
And you're back in the wooden benches, and I know you had marked on your form that you've had 2 spinal surgeries, and it's difficult to sit for long periods of time. Okay. Tell me how you felt during this process of jury selection. Okay. And if you make it to the jury, you'd have one of the cushy chairs that these people have up here, so that you'd have a more comfortable place to sit than you would now. I'm sure you weren't offended by what I said. And it looks like you've got some strong ties to law enforcement.
I have some time.
Okay, could you tell me about those?
My cousin was a law enforcement in St. Bernard.
And if you could try to keep your voice up for the question. Now we're getting further and further back in the...
My cousin was a policeman in the city of St. Bernard, and my brother-in-law is in the Navy, and he's in the intelligence of the Navy.
Okay. And you have a feeling that police do stop African Americans too much?
Based on the news, that's just my opinion, based on what I see in the news.
Okay. And I was trying to figure out the bad experience that you had with weapons. Could you tell me a little bit about that?
I was back, and there's two issues. I was shot at during the riots back in the 70s, and my oldest son was murdered.
I'm sorry about that. How long ago would that have been?
1999.
Okay. Would my office then have been the ones that prosecuted that?
I would say yes, this was here in Hamilton County.
Okay. Was there a trial, do you know, or did it?
There was a trial.
Do you recall what the defendant's name was?
Defendant?
The shooter.
Yes. I say it?
Sure.
William Miller.
William Miller.
Yes.
Okay. Where did that happen?
It happened on the west side,
Okay.
and I remember one of the prosecutors, I think his name was
Okay. Was it a jury trial like we're going through now?
Yes, yesterday before they had a bunch of memories because the jury box was on the other side.
Okay. Do you remember who the judge was?
Not for that trial.
Okay. Do you feel that my office handled the case appropriately?
Yes, I do.
Was it a guilty verdict?
Yes, it was.
And I know that doesn't bring back your son, but at least there's some measure of justice, did you feel?
Some justice, yes.
Okay. And having gone through that, how would that, if at all, impact your ability to be a juror in this case?
I think it would impact my ability because, unfortunately, I would almost have to side with the state and county
Okay.
just because of what I've heard when I was complaining.
And I'm sorry to bring this up. It happened a while back, and it's always painful to bring up these kind of memories, and I apologize with you having to share this in front of like a large group of people in this kind of forum. So based on that, you don't think you could be a fair juror in this case?
No, I can't.
Okay. Judge, I would ask that number 85 be excused for cause.
Okay, juror number 85, you're excused for cause. Thank you very much for your service.
See. Hello, juror number 86. Morning. And I think we went to the same high school, and we know each other through sports. Fair to say? And I'm sure all of you looking at me would not think I'm an athlete, but you know different. Is that fair to say? Okay. Thank you. The fact that we know each other, I know we've never really socialized, gone out, talked very much, but do you feel that you could be fair to the state and fair to the defense, knowing that we know each other before this jury selection?
I don't think that would impact.
Okay. And I know that just maybe one of the threshold questions is that you do work for UC. Do you feel that you could be a fair juror based on the fact that you work for the university?
It would be very problematic for me. There's the trial is going to impact the university a great deal, and trying to navigate doing the right thing versus trying to anticipate what is appropriate, how it would impact the university.
Okay. Would it be fair to say this might not be this wouldn't be the best case for you to be on, that you could be a juror on another type of case, but this one would be a problem?
This would be a problem.
Judge, I would ask that 86 be excused for cause.
Okay, juror number 86, thank you. You are excused for cause at this time. Thank you for your service.
looks like we're still at 25. Okay, number 87. You're an electrician?
Yes, sir.
And it looks like, as far as the body-worn camera, you have seen it?
Yes, sir.
And tell me what your thoughts were after you saw that. Because you might have forgotten to answer question number 60 about what your thoughts were after seeing the video as to whether the shooting was justified or not.
I don't, my personal opinion, I don't think you can judge just on that. There's only, I think, 2-3 minute video.
Okay.
So there was only a snippet in the middle.
Okay.
So it's in
Okay. Would you say that you have an opinion one way or another as to the guilt or innocence of the defendant in this case?
No,
Could you be fair to either side?
absolutely.
And have you discussed the case with other people before you got called for jury service?
No. I'm busy with my work and my family, and I don't really care about what happens.
Okay. I think you had raised your hand before about maybe some questionnaire concerns.
Yeah, I don't want my name or address released.
Okay.
No one needs to know who I am, where I live.
Yes, sir. If that's not disclosed, would you have a problem with some of your other answers being given out?
No, fine.
And it looks like your son is on a team with a UC police officer's son.
No, he's a Hamilton County Sheriff.
Hamilton County Sheriff. Okay. When they had asked you about the shooting of African Americans, unarmed African Americans, you had said yes and no. Problem is, in what are the people getting shot at doing to be in a position to be shot at? Could you expand on that answer for me a little bit?
Well, I mean, obviously, the problem when people are getting shot, number one. But number two, I'm not there, you know, I think the same philosophy as some of the other people. You know, if you're going, at least do what you're told. Whether the outcome is good or bad, I don't believe you should get shot. Unless it's basically a gun battle out on the street. But I don't think anyone, doesn't matter what race, color, where you come from, it doesn't matter. You shouldn't get shot.
Okay.
That's not the whole point of the judicial system.
And you had thought that the justice system in America was not fair? And tell me why you don't think it's fair.
Because the more money you make, the more you can get off. If you have celebrity status or not, you still get off.
Okay. And is there a particular case that you followed that maybe led you to that conclusion, or?
Not really any case. It's just where I live, I see a lot of drug activity. And if you look at people having a drug problem, they'll get thrown into jail and a lot longer than, say, a celebrity that gets pulled over and found with marijuana.
Okay.
And you start working on it.
Because you said nothing is fair. If it was, most things would be fine.
Yeah.
When you said nothing is fair, what did you mean by that?
Whole life ain't fair, good.
Okay.
Nothing's fair that you want to have people shooting each other and doing stupid stuff.
Do you feel that you could judge whether or not, if something isn't fine or something isn't fair, who's at fault in that situation? And when they asked if you ever had a negative or frightening experience with a person of another race, you had put yes. Thugs or hoodlums used to come into our neighborhood to sell drugs, sick of it because they didn't live there, so why bring it to my house to meet and sell it? What part of town would that have been in?
I live in Springfield Township, and I live in a neighborhood that's only one way in and out, and drug dealers know that, so they only got to look at one way while they park in front of my house and deal drugs.
Okay.
I call cops don't do nothing, so now I'm on the phone.
And would the people that sell the drugs, you said, would they be of a particular race?
Most of the dealers are black, and most of the people that buy from them are white.
Okay. And have you ever had any interaction with either the buyers or the sellers from your house?
No.
Okay.
Get caught up in that.
And it looks like you have children?
Yes, sir.
And how does that affect your kids, your family, your ability to enjoy your property?
Well, I mean, if we see someone that obviously isn't around and we usually see driving through the neighborhood, obviously you either put them around in the back or put them in the house, which shouldn't have to live like that.
How prevalent are the drug dealers in your neighborhood?
What happened over the weekend, but in the last 4 or 5 years, it's dropped off drastically.
Would that impact your ability to be fair to one side or the other in this case?
No, I mean, if someone's dealing drugs, then there's, obviously it's against the law. I mean, evidence says one way or the other.
When they had asked you, juror number 87, about do you have an opinion, whether based on religion or otherwise, about whether or not there are ever any circumstances where one human being is justified in taking the life of another? You had said there is no circumstance where one is justified to take another life. Only God has that right.
That's right.
Could you tell me about that?
Very self-explanatory.
Okay.
No one should have power over someone else to take their life, just because unless you're talking about war or something, it shouldn't come down to taking someone's life.
Tell me how that would impact your ability to be fair to Mr. Tenzing or Mr. Dubose in this case. Because he did take a life.
Right, but I don't think in this instance he felt that it was his job to take his life. I mean, I read that question as if someone is standing over someone else and they feel that it's justified to shoot them, that they're allowed to do that.
Okay. So, and just so I'm clear on what your answer is, you feel that sometimes that people are justified in taking people's lives?
Only in war.
Only. Well, what about a police officer in the line of duty? Would they be?
If they're getting shot at, I believe that's justified.
Okay. What about if they're not getting shot at?
I believe that there's other ways that you can do something, granted I'm not obviously involved.
Sure. Do you think you'd be a fair juror to the state or the defendant in this case?
Yeah.
Thank you, juror number 87. See juror number 88. Let's see, you are retired, sir? Okay. It looks like you're you do some part-time. Is it financial work?
Well, no. My son started a business
Rehabbing houses? And then, was that what you said when you said you do physical work?
Yes.
That you actually get down on,
Right.
rip things out, and
They're walls out and stuff. Electrical.
just kind of like on HGTV?
Kind of the same thing.
Okay. And you're trying to flip the houses, so to speak?
Correct.
Okay. And it looks like you've got some courtroom experience, just some minor, you said 3 times, once for wife involved in accident and kids.
Yes.
Were they all minor, like traffic cases?
Well, the accident, my wife was involved in go to the hospital. She almost died.
Sorry.
That was 20 years ago.
Okay. Was that a traffic accident?
Please,
Was that a traffic
it
accident?
was a traffic.
Was somebody else cited or charged with something?
Yes. The man was driving a pickup truck. He was intoxicated.
So was it a drunk driver?
He ran the red light.
What ended up happening with the case?
You know,
Her recovery?
her recovery and stuff like that.
Did she end up recovering?
Yes, she's had some problems since then, but she had any number of problems with broken ribs, punctured lung, lacerated,
Okay.
broken jaw. So it's quite a recovery process, but I think this probably related to some of the problems she has today, arthritis.
Okay. So the justice system can never really fully compensate her or you for what she went through, but do you know what, was he prosecuted in the court system?
Compensated for it. I don't necessarily enter by jury. I don't necessarily think that it was the total amount that we thought we should get, but it was satisfactory.
Okay. And what about with your kids?
Well, we had a couple instances where we went to court with one son.
Anything serious?
No.
Okay. Do you feel that he was treated fairly? And as far as this case, the body-worn camera, do you have an opinion on whether or not the shooting was justified?
No, because I don't really, I mean, I saw the video briefly once when it first happened, but I don't think that I had enough information to really make a good judgment of whether it was or not.
So I think you would put that had he obeyed the officer, the situation wouldn't have happened. And I think that a few other jurors have expressed that kind of issue. How would that impact your ability to be fair to Mr. Dubose in this case?
I don't think I have a problem one way or the other. As long as I got all the information and seen all the evidence, put it all together.
Okay. And would you say you had an opinion before this started as to the guilt or innocence of Mr. Tensing?
You know, I kind of figured that there had to have been something more that I saw or witnessed to why a police officer would shoot someone over a traffic light. So there has to be something more that I haven't heard. But, you know, I just kind of felt that it must have been something to make him do that. Otherwise, why would he shoot?
Okay.
Why would he shoot? Unless it was accidental.
Thank you, juror number 88. Juror number 90. See, you're, looks like a social worker, and you've got an educational degrees in that field, and you work for, you've worked for different, like, local agencies? Okay. And you've heard of the case. Tell me what you've heard of the case before jury service. Okay. Did you have an opinion based on what you knew coming in as far as the guilt or innocence of Mr. Tensing?
No.
Very little, really followed the case very little and don't have a lot of information?
That's correct.
Anything you could think of that after having heard a lot of the other jurors talk this morning and yesterday that you think you need to bring to our attention? And I think you had written that your husband may know some UC officers?
Not UC officers, probably sheriff's deputies,
Okay.
but I'm not certain who they are or if they're, I don't know that job.
Okay. Thank you, juror number 90, and I think that's 28.
Yeah, I guess that's about right.
Okay. Thank you, folks, for being so patient. I appreciate it.
Juror number 90, you win for best handwriting. It's immaculate. I can't read Mr. Matthews begin. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, if you could go ahead and have a seat. I want to get as much in as we can during this time. So, Mr. Matthews, you can begin.
Thank you, Your Honor. Okay, everybody ready? A little change of pace here from Mr. Teager. And ladies and gentlemen, I hope that I don't repeat a whole lot of what Mr. Teager has discussed with you, but there will be some things that I will go over again with you. The way I normally start out is that I have a series of questions that I ask to everybody as a whole, and I would ask that you respond to those, but if I don't ask you immediately why you responded to that, keep that in mind and remember if you ever get up here into the box, and that's for you folks back in the back. And then what I would plan to do after I go through the general questions to everybody is I will probably have a lot of questions for you individually based on your questionnaire. Some people, there won't be that many questions. Others, I'll have a lot of questions, because even though the questionnaires covered a lot of ground, a lot of your answers made new questions arise that I'd like to follow up on. And based on some of the things Mr. Teager asked and some of the responses I heard, I also will have some questions based on that. As you know, we're at the point in the trial which some people call voir dire, some call it voir dire, some call it voir dire. I've been doing this a long time. I'm not exactly sure how you pronounce it, so I just call it picking a jury. What we're trying to do here is find 12 people who will be fair and impartial to both the state of Ohio and to Ray Tenzing. As you've heard, many people, and probably just about every one of you, are somewhat familiar with this case. Those of you who didn't have any idea about it when you came in here obviously have learned a lot just sitting here. We're trying to find 12 people who will be neutral going into the trial and listen to the evidence, listen to the arguments of the attorneys, and listen to the law that Judge Giz will provide at the end of the case before you make up your minds. I know that's tough to do. You've seen some of your fellow panel members excused because they said they had formed opinions and they couldn't get rid of those opinions, couldn't get them out of their minds, and therefore they couldn't be fair and impartial. The folks who have been questioned thus far up to this point have all pretty much indicated, I think, that you can be fair and impartial, that any opinions you may have you can put out of your minds. But again, some of you individually I will delve into that with. I think you've all indicated that nobody here knows me. Nobody knows Ray Tenzing. Nobody knows Mr. Teager. Nobody knows Ms. DeGraffenried. Is that a correct assumption on my part? Okay, Mr. Teager and Ms. DeGraffenried work for Joe Dieters, the Hamilton County prosecutor. Does anybody know Mr. Dieters? Mr. Dieters is a part-time prosecutor, I believe. He also has a private law practice. At one time, he was associated with the law offices of Waite, Schneider, Bayless, and Chesley. Has anybody ever had any association with that law firm? And I'm not sure who he's associated with, if anybody at this point, but is it fair to say that nobody's ever had any contact with Mr. Dieters in his role as a private attorney? Okay. I think you've all indicated you don't know Ray Tenzing, is that correct? Ray's mom and dad are seated in the back of the courtroom. They stood up yesterday. Ray's dad is a contractor in the concrete business. Has anybody ever done business with Ray Tenzing's dad, Paul? Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, if during the course of this proceeding, and I mean from the day we started up and through the end of the trial, I do anything that you find offensive or that upsets you in any way, or I ask any questions as we go along here, I'm going to ask you, can you all hold that against me and not hold it against Ray Tenzing? Would everybody agree with that? Okay. And I don't intend to do that, but in the course of a trial, you never know what may happen. One of the things that happens here in the criminal justice system in America is that every defendant is presumed innocent at the beginning of a trial. That is, if you were asked right now to leave this courtroom and go back and deliberate and sign a verdict, theoretically, or not theoretically, but in reality, your verdict would have to be not guilty. Is there anybody that has a problem with that concept? And the reason I bring that up is that right now, you've heard Mr. Teager say what some of the facts are in the case, but you haven't heard the complete story. And right now, you have not heard or seen any of the evidence in the case that is going to be presented in the courtroom. And for that reason, you can't come to a verdict. The only time you can come to a verdict is at the conclusion of the trial, and I can't stress that enough. No matter what you've seen or heard about the case up to this point, you have to put that out of your mind and decide this case solely upon what happens in this courtroom. That is testimony from that witness stand, exhibits that will be admitted during the course of the trial, to some extent the arguments made by the attorneys, and more importantly, the law that Judge Giz is going to explain to you at the end of the trial. Anybody have any problem with that concept? Okay. Mr. Teager was not so subtle yesterday, I thought, in one of the things he said. He said his office reviews all police shooting cases and most are justified so that they do not result in indictments. What he was saying there was that his office reviewed this case and thought it was not justified, and that's why Ray Tenzing's sitting there in this courtroom and why all of you are here. Right here, ladies and gentlemen, is a copy of the indictment that was returned by the grand jury in this case. This indictment charges Ray Tenzing with the offenses of murder and voluntary manslaughter. And all that it is a document that notifies Ray that he's been charged with 2 criminal offenses. Can you all accept that the indictment is nothing more than a notification of what he's been charged with, that it has nothing to do with whether he is guilty or not guilty of the offenses he's charged with? Can everybody accept that proposition? And just because a grand jury has returned an indictment, that means they've been presented some evidence presented by the prosecutor's office to cause them to issue this indictment. But we don't know, because grand jury proceedings are secret, we don't know what evidence was presented to the grand jury or what evidence was not presented to the grand jury. Again, all this is an indictment notifying Mr. Tenzing of what he's charged with. Can you all agree that the presumption of innocence that I just spoke about applies regardless of the fact that there's been an indictment returned? Okay, thank you. As I indicated, there are 2 charges in this case, and as you all already know, the charges are murder and voluntary manslaughter. Two of the most serious charges or crimes that can be alleged to have been committed in the state of Ohio. Is there anybody here who feels that because of the serious nature of this case, I don't want any part of it or I can't be any part of it? Okay, I'm going to take the silence as a statement that you all can, no matter what the charges are, you can sit on this case if we ask you. Okay. Mr. Tenzing has entered a plea of not guilty of each one of the charges that has been filed. That means he says, I'm not guilty of murder, I'm not guilty of voluntary manslaughter. And that's why we're all here, to have a trial. And that, again, as I've indicated, that not guilty plea is his indication that he's not responsible for any criminal offense, and it's up to the state of Ohio to prove his guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Judge Giz will define for you the term reasonable doubt. That is the standard that you are to apply to the evidence that will be presented. Mr. Teager yesterday indicated that reasonable doubt is a legal term that has been defined by the legislature of the state of Ohio. It is read to every criminal jury in every criminal case in the state, word for word, verbatim. It doesn't change from one court to the next. Are you all willing to listen to Judge Giz's definition of reasonable doubt and apply that standard to the evidence that's presented? And in this case, the term reasonable doubt will apply to the state's charges of murder and voluntary manslaughter. Our defense to the charges in this indictment is twofold. Number one, murder says that Ray Tenzing purposely caused the death of Sam DuBose. Voluntary manslaughter says he knowingly caused the death of Sam DuBose. Ray Tenzing's defense is that I intentionally shot Sam DuBose, but it was not my purpose to kill him. I didn't knowingly kill him. My purpose was to stop the threat that he presented to me. And stopping that threat is, if in fact the evidence convinces you that that's what he was doing, then he was justified in what happened here. And the burden of proof on us, the burden of proof shifts to us to show that Ray was justified in causing the death of Sam DuBose, but we have to prove that by a preponderance of the evidence. Preponderance of the evidence is a lesser standard than beyond a reasonable doubt. Judge Giz is going to define that for you at the end of the case. Are you all willing to, again, listen to the definition of preponderance of the evidence and apply it just as she instructs you it should be applied? Okay. Now, Mr. Teager brought up the fact, and it's no secret, we all know that this case was tried once before last fall, and it ended in a hung jury. And Mr. Teager told you that's why we're all here, because there has to be a retrial. That was a little misstatement on his part. There doesn't have to be a retrial. It was the prosecutor's office that decided there should be a retrial. And again, I don't mean to quarrel, but I'm pointing that out because I agreed with a lot of the things that Mr. Teager told you about this case and about the law as he questioned you, but there are some things that I don't agree with and some places where I think he misspoke. One of those areas is that Mr. Teager said this, he said this was a murder arising out of a traffic stop. Well, I've got some disagreement with that, a lot of disagreement with that. Number one, I don't think it was a murder. I think the evidence will show that it was not a murder. Murder is a legal term. That's what you are all here to decide. Whoever ends up on this jury is here to decide whether this was a murder. The other thing is that it's been portrayed as arising out of a traffic stop. And a lot of you said, I've heard a lot of you say that, well, somebody shouldn't have died as a result of a traffic stop. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's why we're here, because that's not what the evidence is. There's a whole lot more to this case than a traffic stop. That's what will be developed during the course of this trial. And that's what we're asking you all to keep an open mind and don't make up your mind until you've heard all the evidence. Again, is everybody willing to do that? Thank you. One other thing Mr. Teager indicated was that this is not a whodunit. And he gave the example of a body found laying in the road, I think, and nobody around. There has to be an investigation to figure out who caused that body to be laying in the road. I completely agree with that. There's no question Ray Tenzing caused the death of Sam DuBose. And as I just pointed out, the question in this case is whether he purposely caused the death or knowingly caused the death of Sam DuBose, and whether or not he was justified. That's what your role will be if you end up in this box as one of the final 12 jurors. I talked about the presumption of innocence that attaches to all defendants in all criminal cases. There's another right that every defendant in every criminal case has in America, and we talked about that a little bit in the questionnaire in a sort of a different form, but every defendant has a right to remain silent. That is, anybody accused of or charged with a criminal offense can, from the moment they are taken into custody right up and through the end of a trial, has a right to not say a word about it, not explain it, not do anything. And Judge Giz would tell you at the end of the trial, if Ray doesn't testify, that that's his absolute right and that you're not to hold that against him. Is there anybody that has a problem with that? If he would just sit there and not testify in this court, is there anybody who would say, well, I'm going to hold that against him, he's got to be guilty? Okay. I wanted to get your assurance that you won't hold that against him if he doesn't testify, simply because we're trying to find people who will follow the law and be fair and impartial, and that's a right that he has. I will tell you right now, Ray Tenzing made a statement at the time that this occurred. He testified at his first trial, and he will testify at this trial. But again, I wanted to make sure that you're willing. That was a little test to see if everybody's willing to follow the law. In the questionnaire, I think it was put to you, do you think a defendant should testify at his trial? And the great majority of you said yes. I think he should, just so we hear all sides of the story. And obviously, in the perfect world, you're not to hold it against the defendant if they don't testify. I'm not sure how many jurors actually follow that instruction when a judge gives it. Everybody wants to hear what the defendant has to say. In this case, you're going to hear what Ray Tenzing has to say about what happened on July 19, 2015. Another issue that I want to talk to everybody about is the video, the body-worn camera. That's going to be a major part of the evidence in this case. And most of you have indicated that you've seen the video of the body-worn camera at least once. Would you all agree with me, though, that body-worn camera video is but one piece of evidence, that you cannot decide this case based solely on on that video? You've got to hear all the other evidence before you reach a conclusion as to whether he's guilty or not guilty. Everybody in agreement with that? The other aspect of that video, and I guess maybe there are a couple of you who have indicated you've not seen it, I'm going to tell you right now, it's graphic. It lasts probably, the critical part of it is probably less than 3 seconds, and it's herky-jerky and there's a lot of movement, but it's graphic. Is there anybody, and there will be a coroner's office representative in here testifying about the autopsy that she performed in this case, and she too will have some rather graphic photographs of Sam DuBose after he was shot. Is there anybody here who feels that they do not have the stomach or that they can't participate because they may be exposed to something like that? Okay. We've had some discussion about experts. Experts who will come in here and testify what the video shows or does not show. The state of Ohio has an expert. The defense has an expert. I think you've all agreed, and one of the jurors back here in the back indicated that, or I think Mr. Teeger asked, do you think the experts will cancel each other out? Will you all agree with me that the experts are trained more than most people, and that's why they're experts, to opine about what a video shows or doesn't show? Can you all agree with that? But would you also all agree with me that at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what the experts say, all they're testifying about, or their purpose is to assist you in trying to understand, but at the end of the day, it's up to each of you individually and collectively as a jury to decide in your own minds what that video shows or doesn't show or what impact it has on this case. Everybody in agreement with that? Thank you. Can you all agree that a camera only records what the eye of that camera sees? And it doesn't record what the eye of the person, in this case, this is a camera that Ray Tenzing is wearing on his chest. It's not one that he's looking through and seeing the exact same thing the camera sees. The camera in this case sees what the camera sees. Would you all agree that it does not see necessarily what Ray Tenzing saw? Can you all agree with that? And can you all agree that the camera doesn't have a brain and it doesn't have guts and it can't feel what Ray Tenzing felt and perceive what Ray Tenzing felt on July 19, 2015? Can everybody agree with that? And again, I go back to the fact that there is a video in this case, but the video is by far not the only piece of evidence that you are to consider. I think I've asked this before, but at the end of the case, Judge Giz is going to instruct you on the law that applies to everything you hear in this case. Is there anybody here who says, I don't care what Judge Giz says, I'm going to do what I think the law should say? Or are you all willing to follow the law as she instructs you? Okay. Also, ladies and gentlemen, at the end of this case, the 12 of you who finally are in this box, and I look at you folks, but I don't think all 12 of you are all going to be here at the end of this, but some of you others will probably move into these spots. At the end of the case, the final 12 people are going to be asked to go back to Judge Giz's jury room, and we're not in her room, so I point back that way. That's where Judge Shanahan's jury room is. Hers is behind her courtroom. But the 12 of you will be asked to go back and deliberate in this case. Talk about the evidence, decide whether Ray Tenzing is guilty or not guilty of some offense in this case. That requires participation on the part of each one of you. Is there anybody here who feels, number one, that I don't want to be part of a discussion with 11 other people, that I can't do it? And I'm going to take it from not seeing any raised hands that everybody is agreeable that they can go back and participate if asked. The other thing is that 12 people deciding a case sometimes don't all see eye to eye. And there are going to be, sometimes discussions in a jury room can get pretty heated. I one time was fortunate enough to sit on a jury, an experience that I'll never forget. It was not a major case like this, but there were people, it got a little heated at times. In this case, we all know the first case ended in a hung jury. We all know that the jury was sequestered, I think it was for 2 nights at the end of the first trial, which resulted in about 3 days of deliberations. You know, I wasn't present in a jury room, but I can take it from that fact that not all 12, and I know at the end result, not all 12 people could agree. And I assume that there were some pretty heated discussions in the jury room. Is there anybody here who feels that they don't want to be a part of that? If it gets down to the point where there are 11 people who feel one way and you feel the exact opposite way, is there anybody here who feels that I would just give it up and no matter what my opinion is, right or wrong, I'm just going to join the majority just to get this over with? You all agree that you could stick by your opinion no matter what? Would you all agree that if, in fact, you are ultimately convinced that maybe your opinion is not right after you've expressed it one way, that you wouldn't be so stubborn that you couldn't change your opinion? Okay. I think, ladies and gentlemen, we've talked about the potential length of the trial. I thought when we started this process that by today we'd be darn close to the end of it. And obviously we're still right at the very beginning. Judge Giz indicated to you that she would like to have your commitment that you could be here through the end of June. I assume that everybody here still feels that they can make that commitment. Is that a fair statement on my part? Okay. And I would expect that, assuming things keep moving along the way they are, we'll be finished long before the end of June. But I expected we'd be a lot farther than we are now, too. So who knows? One of the things that we're going to ask the people who are seated as the 12 jurors, and we're going to seat 4 alternates just in case something happens to one of the regular 12 during the course of the trial, we're going to go out to the scene where this incident occurred on Rice Street, right off of Thill Street, which is not all that far from here. It's 1.5 miles or so, or maybe less than that. But that is Rice Street is a street that has a little uphill grade to it. Is there anybody here who feels like physically, and we're going to ask you to get out of the bus and walk and look at that scene. Is there anybody here who feels that physically they could not accomplish that? Okay. We ask on the questionnaire about anybody's affiliation or connection with the University of Cincinnati. And I think a number of you have indicated you either graduated from UC, you work at UC, or you have kids who go to UC. Is there anybody that feels like their connection with the University of Cincinnati would cause them not to be able to be fair and impartial if we ask you to sit on this jury? If you'd feel like, I don't like UC, or I like UC so much I can't be involved in this case. Okay. There will be a lot of law enforcement witnesses who testify in this case. Ray Tenzing is a law enforcement officer. Is there anybody who has feelings either so positive or so negative about law enforcement officers that you can't sit on this case? Okay. Mr. Teager read the witnesses that will be testifying on behalf of the state of Ohio, and many of those same witnesses I had intended to call if he does not, but I'd like to quickly read the witness list that I think we will be calling to see if anybody's familiar with any of these people. There's a fellow by the name of Robert Topmiller, who is with the Hamilton County Coroner's Office. A Lieutenant Tim Barge with the University of Cincinnati Police Department, retired Lieutenant Rick Haas with the University of Cincinnati Police Department, Police Officer David Joel Lindenschmidt, Police Officer Philip Kidd, Police Officer Derek Nolan, Police Officer Jeffrey Van Pelt, all with the University of Cincinnati Police Department. Anybody know any of those individuals? Okay. With the Cincinnati Police Department, there's Sergeant Nate Asbury. Anybody know Sergeant Asbury? And then finally, the video forensic analyst that will testify on behalf of us, or on behalf of the defendant, is Scott Roeder. With his company is called Evidence Room, LLC. Anybody familiar with him or his company? And then Jim Scanlon is a use of force expert who's a retired Columbus, Ohio policeman. Anybody familiar with Jim? Okay. This case, as you know, involves the use of a firearm. Mr. Tenzing, or Ray, was a police officer. Sam DeBose's death was caused by a firearm. Is there anybody who has opinions so strongly one way or another about guns that they can't sit on this jury? Okay, I'm going to try to wrap this up because we're getting close to 12:15 and it's been a bit of a long morning. There's been a lot of publicity about this case. I think everybody has indicated, and I'll deal with this individually, but I think you all understand that you can't watch or listen to or discuss the case with anybody, including your family. Some of you have indicated that could be a problem, but I think most of you understand now that you can't do it. Is there anybody who feels that they won't do it? You all understand you can't do it? Are you all willing to not do it? Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, when this case first happened, or when this incident first happened, there was a lot of comment in the news by people associated with the University of Cincinnati. The mayor of Cincinnati weighed in on it. The former police chief of Cincinnati weighed in on it. The city manager of Cincinnati weighed in on it. Is anybody familiar with any of their comments? And you, sir, are juror number 19. And is that because of your affiliation with the Over the Rhine Business Council and that sort of thing? Okay. Are you able to put out of your mind anything you may have heard them say or anything you know about it? Thank you. Okay, Judge, I have a little bit farther to go. Should I press on, or I see some sort of squeaming?
It's 12:08, we've got 7 minutes. That's fast, guys, so don't anybody get excited.
Okay.
Sorry. I want to get everything in we can get in today, so
Okay.
keep going, I'll stop you.
All right. Thank you. Does anybody have any strong feelings about the Ohio Supreme Court or the Supreme Court of the United States? The reason I ask that is that the law that Judge Giz is going to explain to you at the end of this case is set forth by both of those judicial bodies. Occasionally we run into people who say, if the United States Supreme Court says that's what the law is, I don't believe it and I'm not going to follow it. Anybody feel that way here? Okay. Last week, right after we started this process, Black Lives Matter held a rally up right around where we are going to be going in the bus. Did anybody here see that rally or attend that rally? Okay. There have been a number of community forums prior to the start of this trial at various churches and city recreation centers. Has anybody attended any of those or participated in any of those? Juror number...
There's not specific to this trial, but for this case, I should say. I have community forums and stuff like that.
Okay, and when was that since?
No,
when?
last time she was in February.
All right, and that was not designed or was not to talk about this case?
No.
Okay, was there anything about your participation in that forum that would cause you to have a problem sitting on this case or being fair and impartial to everybody in this case? I'm sorry?
No.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, this case involves a white police officer shooting an African American man. And as much as I would like to have this not be a racial issue or being involved with the color of a man's skin, it is. And it has been made that way by various entities, but it's a factor that has to be dealt with, and I want to deal with it right here. Is there anybody who feels that race is such an overriding aspect of this case that they can't be fair and impartial? Are you all willing to treat this as a case that involves the actions of Sam DuBose and the actions of Ray Tenzing, and it doesn't matter whether either one of them is black, white, pink, purple, or green? You'll decide it based on the facts and on what the evidence shows. Can everybody agree with me on that? Thank you.
Mr. Matthews, is speaking good pause, or can you get through the rest in about 4 minutes?
Judge, I can stop right now.
Okay. If you don't mind, they said lunch was here, so I thought we should allow people time to eat and go to the restroom. Thank you. I apologize for interrupting. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to remind you that you're not allowed to discuss what you've heard in here today or anything regarding this case with each other. I'm going to give you a 45-minute break now. It's going to go from 12:15. I'm looking jury selected as soon as possible. Please take a break here, have something to eat, and remember this is all confidential for the time being.